Join us for the Criterion Institute podcast as Joy Anderson, a global thought leader in business and social change, leads us through a series of discussions, interviews, frameworks, rants, and reframes that will help you better understand how to use finance as a tool for transformative systems change.
I am Joy Anderson, and this is the Criterion Institute podcast. Over the last 4 years, Criterion has had an extraordinary opportunity to partner with a firm called ESP, Entrepreneurial Solutions Partners. They're a firm based in Africa that works to provide value creation, to meet businesses at their point of hope and take them to the next level. So they were, along with us and others, part of a consortium that made up the Mastercard African Growth Fund. And what we've learned with them has just been written up in our second learning book with the fund that's about delivering services. And it's interesting because so often we think about services that support businesses as what enables investment capital to move, what supports businesses to grow. But in this learning book, one of the things we explore is how to see those business services as part of a service economy, as part of a knowledge economy, as a value in and of itself, the infrastructure necessary to make a market work. So this conversation is with Eric and Charity, the two founders, extraordinary humans. And this is our conversation about what we've learned together doing this work. Hey, Eric, what's the story behind your motivation for ESP?
Joy, thank you so much for the question. Motivation behind ESP was literally trying to find a way that's scalable to create prosperity in Africa. And it came after I had spent quite a bit of time working in Rwanda with the leadership of Rwanda and trying to kind of replicate some of the early momentum that we're seeing in Rwanda and other countries, and realizing that it was a lot more difficult than we thought. But noticing that everywhere we went, there were entrepreneurs that were literally trying at their own level to address some of the challenges that we have around how do we create prosperity in Africa and in low-income nations in general. So this basically led me to realize that entrepreneurs could be one of the levers on which we build if we are serious about changing lives, changing communities, and changing countries. So that's also the reason why at ESP we literally work super hard to make sure that we put the entrepreneurs at the center of everything that we do. But we look at them not as isolated individuals, but we look at them, of course, as human beings based on who they are and what they're trying to do. But we look at them also in the context of their enterprises, but also in the context of the ecosystem in which they actually operate. And we believe that the only way you bring transformation if you can address those three levels in the work that's done.
So how did you guys cook? How did you meet up? How did you come together to do this? I don't know. What's your story in all of this, Charity? I think of all the years knowing you all, I've never actually gotten the whole story.
Yeah, the genesis. No, I mean, Eric was doing that strategy work, which I think he downplays quite a bit. There was a strategy firm that was involved in advising directly to the office of the president, the key export sectors, the key institutions, and doing, a lot of really important work. I really wanted, at some point early in my career, really felt called to go home, which is Rwanda, and didn't have exactly the path clear. And I ended up getting to go and work on a strategy for Rwanda's ICT park, worked under a combination of UNDP and the firm that Eric was leading. And so he very much became a mentor, learned a lot about private sector and the role they have in really creating prosperity, really creating economic development. And I think when I met him, I had ideas of working for international NGOs, maybe world
Oh my gosh, Charity, you'd
building.
eat them for lunch. Like you would
Yeah,
just,
well,
like you would, sorry, it's like I think about going into the academy. I have a PhD, so
yes.
I could work in academics. I was like, I'd hurt small animals. I really believe I would. But you in a large NGO, I don't know, Charity, you would like, I can't even see it.
I don't know if they would eat me or I would eat them, but somebody would not survive. And certainly, I think it became clear to me that there are other ways to have impact in this space that were probably better suited to my temperament and really very quickly to my worldviews. Like this idea of centering entrepreneurs, that's what they're designed to do. And so we aligned pretty quickly on both values and I think like a way. What that would shape out to be, I certainly couldn't have seen 15 years ahead what has come of it, but there was enough of an alignment on values and on like a direction, a why we often call it, that yeah, it was a kind of a no-brainer after I finished my master's to be like, let's try and build something that aligns with both who we are, our values, and where we're trying to go and who we want to serve. I think that was probably the biggest thing that was like clear. The rest, made itself clear with each step, but that part was aligned.
I think one of the things that I've been struck in getting to know you all over the last couple of years is I have an allergy to
Mm-hmm.
centering entrepreneurs. Honestly, we center entrepreneurs. Like I hear it, and for a long time, I heard it from you and read it as everything else I've heard, which is sort of impact investing's company picking. We'll overvalue this iconic entrepreneur who's going to make everything happen, and they are like the social entrepreneurship stuff. Like, I mean, this was like the same time that you were starting all of this, but it was freaking exhausting. But when you say center entrepreneurs, you also, in every sentence, when you say that, you are centering entrepreneurs in their context.
Yes.
And that is such a different thing. Like I say this all the time. You do that so differently than most other programs I know that sort of rip the entrepreneur out, hold them up on a stage, treat them like a little bauble. Like a friend of mine at SOCAP once told me that he felt like going to SOCAP, and he was a Black entrepreneur in the United States, and he felt like going to SOCAP was like going to the zoo because everybody just looked at you but didn't actually understand the context in which you're working. Anyway, a little bit of a rant about what often happens when you center entrepreneurs, but you do it differently, right? This whole like centering entrepreneurs in context is something that I don't even think you have to say because you just breathe it. Sorry, I'm so passionate about what you guys do sometimes because it's so different than others I've engaged with who play a similar role but are trying to fix entrepreneurs and don't really understand where they live. Anyway, I'll stop on that rant. But like, how do you actually do that? Like, how do you make sure that when you're centering entrepreneurs, you're centering them in their context, in the ecosystems in which they work?
First of all, thank you for seeing something in us that was so intuitive that maybe we hadn't named it, and certainly don't. It isn't maybe what we lead with because it is just how we see entrepreneurs. And maybe it begins with the fact that ESP has always existed almost as a think tank and a do tank. I don't know that Eric loves that language, but we do advisory work for the ecosystem. We know that entrepreneurs don't exist in a vacuum, and therefore we have a whole practice that focuses on what can happen at the ecosystem, who are the stakeholders, what strategies do they need to be able to enable entrepreneurship. And then when we work with the entrepreneurs, it only makes sense that when we talk to them about where their business is, there's actually an assessment that we do in an audit. It always considers their operating reality. Like that's one of the key pillars. What's the operating reality with which you're trying to do your agribusiness, your fintech, whatever it might be?
Right.
It really
Right.
depends on the ecosystem that you're in. So for me, I think there's something about just how we built those two practice areas that has always made it intuitive. And then I think, I would argue almost that we have three layers. We see the entrepreneur as an individual, like where are they at? Increasingly, if you want to work with women, youth, there are particular constraints, challenges of each individual entrepreneur. And then there's the business, and then there's the ecosystem that they live in. And so for me, there's some of that just always seemed a little bit intuitive. Maybe it helps that we're in the environments. I don't know. Um, Operating,
Live
doing
and
this work
breathe.
in and out. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of our first conversations, Eric. I don't know if you remember this, but it was about a year into the Mastercard African Growth Fund, like operating and working together. And we were having a conversation about that, as all of us did in the fund, about what our different roles were or something. And you got super passionate. I think you were a little pissed at me, but you got super passionate about that entrepreneurs day to day are in potential crises. And so you raise this question, like, how do I get them to think about gender if they're in the middle of a crisis? And you weren't saying, like, I don't want to think about gender. You were kind of like, game on, Joy, like, figure out how to do this. Like, how, given the context in which these entrepreneurs work, don't be some organization that comes in and like slaps gender on top of it. Understand where they actually are. People don't challenge me quite as much as you did in that call. And I really, I don't know, I've respected you so much ever since it, because it really got me thinking about this whole idea of understanding, like, starting to say crisis is a constant, right? That ended up in the investment thesis for the fund, because in some ways of that conversation, to say, how do we understand that context, but then not poo-poo it or say it's all risk then and we can't do anything, but to really understand how they exist within a crisis.
So I think that and Joy, I have to say also thank you for being sort of very patient, because I'm grateful that you kind of read our interaction from the perspective of the passion that I have for what we do. As a matter of fact, at ESP, our values are passion, agility, collaboration, and equity. And we lead with passion, and because for many people this is another competition or another deal. I mean, ESP was actually born out of uh, you know us looking for solutions which were sustainable for the countries we come from. So, first thing that we did at ESP was actually, I was working on a book, and I literally tried to capture my understanding after a number of years working in Africa of what I thought was going on. And it occurred to me that those entrepreneurs were stuck in what I call the survival trap, right? Where the ecosystem is so difficult that we develop a reactive mindset, which means we'll deal with symptoms which are going to alleviate whatever urgent pressure is there. Therefore, we get relief, not transformation,
Yep.
right? And the ecosystem doesn't change. So we set up ESP to bring that level of systemic change. When Charity talks about, the three levels, the individual will be the mindsets which are at play. It would be the action that that person can take based on the agency that they have, right? So this is sort of at the individual level. But those actions are going to have an impact on the company at first that they lead, but probably if they are successful, on the community. They'll pay taxes, they'll create jobs, they will provide services and products which are going to improve lives, which eventually are going to contribute in making the ecosystem slightly better. And I saw it literally writ large with what was happening in Rwanda. So learned a lot about it. And it made it very clear for me that it's not just any other business. The people that we are dealing with, they only have one life, right? So for them, it's very important. It's not a deal. It's not some of the language even that we use shapes the way we approach them. So um, what we try to do is to make sure that as we are approaching those entrepreneurs, we can think of them, as Charity was saying, as human beings with aspiration, with dreams, with strengths, with weaknesses, with constraints, who are trying to muster resources and people around a business construct, which is the vehicle that they have chosen, because they want to, okay, do well for themselves, of course, but also make things happen that if they happen, they'll do well, but they'll also change the environments where they live. So for us, that's the starting point. which I try to document in my book. And then what we are trying to do is to make sure as we implement this, we never forget that what is at SOCAP the winner of the business competition of the year is actually an entire country, a whole community. That person, that young woman is inspiring hundreds of thousands of other young women that will do the same if and only if they can learn from her example and if the ecosystem would allow them. So we have to work at all those levels.
So there's a lot of conversation about sort of systems investing now and a shift to I don't know, it sort of feels like impact investing is trying to reinvent itself to say, we don't just look at individual companies, we look at whole systems. And I think there's a lot of folks struggling with, how well the world of impact investing will be able to do that. But what you're talking about is that, right? It's about thinking about transformation in the context. I've had conversations with both of you about how challenging the business model is to be able to really do that systems level work, because what you're paid for at some level is often how many companies did you work with, not did you build the service provider context that works with those companies? Did you have the ability to look at the whole market in which that company was operating so that you're not seeing their challenges in isolation? And so it's really hard to do that in a business model because most people are buying a service from you anyway. So thinking about that, what have you learned from inside of the fund? What have you been able to try that you wouldn't have otherwise?
So, you see, let me start again with our values. One of the values that we have is collaboration, right? In Africa, people say, oh, it takes a village to raise a child. And it has become one of those cute saying that people use, everywhere. Actually, we believe in it because if you begin with the entrepreneur as a person, and you look at all the challenges that they are facing, you realize very quickly that no single individual or firm can solve all the problems. And as the entrepreneur grows throughout their journey, as they mature as a person and the business matures, either succeed or fails, challenges change. So the only way to address all those challenges is to have a collection or a group of service providers that can bring in different things. Maybe you need a lawyer now. Maybe you need an engineer that can fix this. Maybe you need an expert which can help them clear this factory that they just ordered from China. There is no way that any single organization can actually build
Right.
all the expertise and skills on tap for whenever those issue happens because you don't know what they are going to be tomorrow, right? So therefore, you have to have a mechanism where you begin by aggregating. First of all, you focus a lot on meeting the entrepreneur where they are, to understand the challenges, to understand what they are going through, to be able to map out where they are in that particular arc on the development. And then once you understand and once you've developed that relationship of trust, that they can open up and tell you as things are happening, what they are really going through, you can then source whatever support is required at that time. Now, the problem is this. The problem is the people you are sourcing the support from are also SMEs
Right.
who are working in the same environment. So they may have a fancy degree. I mean, how would we know? We both have master degrees, right? But even today, we still struggle with basic thing of running any business plus a service business in Africa, right? So nobody is immune to that. Gravity applies to everyone, right? So you have to think about that. And I would say that the Mastercard Africa Growth Fund has helped us quite a bit because it has given us enough of an aggregated demand that we can actually build a coalition of those BDS providers because they hear Mastercard Africa Growth Fund, a $200 million initiative, and then everybody wants to be involved, right? So therefore, we can then work with them, try to understand what they do, try to codify their expertise, And then we have so many people, so many entrepreneurs in the portfolio that we can also give them feedback. We can figure out who's the best at doing what, etc., etc.
I think it is part of how we always wanted to do things. We've never aspired to be the solution for every challenge an entrepreneur is facing in every economy and in every sector. And so there are many projects where we've worked with other service providers and made referrals, but the scale and the scope and the reach of the Mastercard Foundation Africa Growth Fund has allowed us to really serve as an aggregator, to really, like Eric said, codify. We really have a database of business development service providers across the continent in a range of sectors, and then to actually deploy them. So we've actually used over 100 BDSPs to support the close to 100 portfolio companies that are now onboarded. And so in practice, get to see what it's like to deploy the best that we can access for whatever challenge that we see the entrepreneur facing. And then we get to focus on, I think the sweet spot for us is really that human connection, that empathy, that trust, building that to help them diagnose themselves and figure out their priorities. And then there are some particular areas where we might have in-house expertise. And then if you need a tax expert in Nigeria, we'll go find you one. We'll find the best we can. We'll work with you to get it and then deploy them to help you address whatever's on deck for you. That I think is a unique part of being the BDS provider on such a big program, such a big initiative. It allows us to really sit in that spot when I think it's pretty special. I think it's pretty unique and lots we can learn.
A lot of what as we work together on this last learning book that the fund's putting out, one of the insights that really came from processing our learning is that made a big difference in the power dynamics, right? Like at some basic level, choice, agency is the problem, right? Entrepreneurs get told what they need and then they get told what to buy by their investors, by an accelerator. Here's what you need and here we are. And you didn't even know you needed us. But I worked at a consulting firm for a hot minute, otherwise known as 2 years, and they literally had a wheel of weakness is what I called it. They called it something else, but it was basically an inventory that says, here's all of the things that we're going to look at and tell you that you don't do well so that you'll buy our services, which drove me up a wall. I was telling this story the other day, when I first founded Criterion, I started it actually with somebody from that same firm. And a year in, I bought her out because I wanted to meet people at their point of hope. And she still was running through that wheel of weakness and saying, but we need to fix people. And I will never forget the moment where I was like, I cannot work with you if you are trying to fix people. And that's the pressure, right? Like if you just have a set of providers that you want to, then you need to tell people that they need those providers. And I think that sort of looking at some of the core power dynamics around expertise and other pieces that we play out within this learning book, I think that ability to create choice, true choice, and not just, I think Eric, you've said this also, but like not just choice because they didn't even know the choice, but to show the range of the choices and to help them see what choices they didn't even know they had available to them.
Yeah, I think, well, I love what you've said about hope. To me, the decision to center on entrepreneurs is actually because they're very hopeful by nature. Like it's actually a joy to work with many entrepreneurs because it requires a certain level of like faith and hope, and you aspire for something, and that is like it is a really exciting posture to work with, to work from, and to work with. It's why we're entrepreneurs ourselves. It forces you to inhabit this space of hopefulness. And I also think they're experts. So this question around expertise, I also have a big challenge with it. I have a bone to pick. They are experts on their business, and they actually are active participants in helping us. They drive the decisions on what are the key challenges. We are only informed. We're like a mirror. They carry the expertise on themselves and their business, and I think we have an ability to like put up a lens, give them a different angle, advise them on what options are out there, but they live and breathe their businesses. They live and breathe this stuff. So for me, what you've said is like totally resonates with why we wake up every morning.
Yeah, but Joy, I think that as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about what that choice would look like if entrepreneurs could make the same choice around the kind of capital
Yep.
they get and the kind of conditions that capital comes under. So if you look at the way capital allocation works on the continent, and I mean by that on the African continent, you often get the impression that capital allocators or investors have solutions that are looking for a problem, right? So they don't begin with what the entrepreneur needs are at all. They begin with, look, I don't know, I run a bank, and for you to get a loan with us, this is basically, the conditions, and you have to have this guarantee, and you have to have this title, and da 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 da. If I am operating like a private equity fund, right? Private equity, the rules, yeah, da da da, the structure, the clawbacks, I mean, it never starts with
Mhm.
this entrepreneur that is there. Let's say I ask them really, what do they need? Would they want me to come in with a mezzanine structure with like different levels and all of that? Probably not, right? But they are stuck in the survival trap. They work in an ecosystem where the power dynamics is actually stuck against them, especially if they're looking for capital. Therefore, they have to bend over backward, agree to whatever solution is being sold to them if it's actually going to be a problem for them tomorrow, right? So for me, there is also a big piece there that has to be addressed. Where I think innovation could be in the way people think could be super
Okay,
super
so
helpful.
here's a cool idea. You both know Susie Pan, but one of the ideas that she's really been playing with for the last year is the idea of investable hope, which I just love as just an isn't that a cool idea? Just
Concept.
like
Yeah.
I don't know what it means fully. We're just sort of exploring that. It's like one of those like take a word and figure out what it means. But what I just had as an image is what if we instead of building a fund and then fixing the entrepreneurs so that they take the money in the fund, what if we started with the investable hope that sits within a set of entrepreneurs and said, what do they need to live out their hope, to make that real, and then work backwards from that? I mean, this is our sort of ongoing rant of fix the capital, not the company, because at some level, too often we're fixing companies rather than saying, here is this investable hope. Let's build the kind of capital, which hopefully would be more local and a bunch of other things around that.
Yeah.
No, listen, I think that I like the even the two words because hope and investments are never in the same. I won't even say sentence. They wouldn't be in the same encyclopedia in Africa, right? People think about about investment, they hear risk, they hear return, they hear growth, whatever. Hope isn't there, right? Every single entrepreneur that's going to do something at scale knows somehow there is something that's about hope because fundamentally they can see all of it. They can see the entire journey from where they are standing. Yet they believe there is a chance because through some sort of process they think they can make it happen. So I think I like the sort of the approach, and that alone would sort of force all of us to think about capital
Yeah, yeah.
differently.
No, and I think I mean, Eric, part of the reason I work in investments is because I think you have to have hope, right? You're putting money at work, like you have to have hope, but you can tell how many people actually don't, right? That they're there to say, let me destroy you in due diligence to make sure that I can find all of the risks without actually seeing the hope. Um, and so thinking about, I mean, some of the conversations that we've been having for a while now are sort of what if we centered value creation as the starting place for a fund? And I think in some ways ESP already does this in other places, but the thing I've really I kept thinking about is what if, and in the Mastercard African Growth Fund, for all kinds of understandable reasons, we, for the first couple of years, really led with deploying the capital, and ESP was a little bit on the wait and see side of once we deploy the capital and work with the investment vehicles and the portfolio companies. But what if we had reversed that? What if we started with value creation and then built the investments around what we learned from that? It just makes a lot of sense for me. But often the value creation, for good or for all of the strengths that value creation has for businesses, it's often following the lead of investments versus investments following the lead of where value has been found.
I would say that one of the things that, and I will let CK Charity comment on that in a few, but I would say one of the main things that we have learned collectively from the Mastercard Foundation Africa Growth Fund is really the importance of pre-investment value creation services. Because we have realized that actually, in nature, no single business will take every single thing that capital is looking for. So there needs to be work, even when it's a very viable idea with quite a bit of traction, there needs to be some work that's done to make sure that they are ready. But I believe that what you are proposing is even more radical and would make sense because you are saying, let's not define the work that we do with the portfolio companies or with the business, starting with the needs of the investor. Let's really push very hard to make sure that we work with them to design the best possible way they can grow a profitable and impactful venture. And then once that's done, we look for the capital that's appropriate. I think that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, let me just add, I do think it's radical, and I think it's how we have run some of our programs elsewhere, where we actually are working with the entrepreneurs and then using that value creation as a mechanism to engage capital, whether it's through banks or through a small, by comparison, little catalytic fund. I will add that I think the decision to lead with the investment vehicles, they also are small businesses. And so, in
Right.
some ways, I feel like we actually have led with the value creation to that group or that type of small business. We've basically put them at the center of what
Yes.
we're doing, and saying first time women led African funds are small businesses that deserve and can benefit from really target centering them in some ways, whether that be I do see all the things you're pointing to around power and the dynamics, and is it the way to create the most impact? If the impact is X, Y, and Z, maybe it should have been flipped. But I also think there is some particular impacts around, who has capital. Actually, I think it's things I've learned from you around who are making decisions around capital. How do we shift who's at the table, and how do we equip and support and enable and create value for that group of small businesses?
So it's a really cool leveling idea to say whether you're a global think tank like Criterion, a think do tank like ESP, or a investment vehicle, or a service provider, or a company that's sort of an entrepreneur sort of working within a context. We're all just businesses. And if we started with that kind of commonality, we might have
Mhm.
clearer conversations, but how different types of businesses get constructed and how they're valued is part of what makes the operating system not quite work. And so leading to one of my big takeaways from working on this learning book and all the conversations that we had is really seeing the service providers, because Charity, you talk about seeing the investment vehicles as companies, as SMEs, but you also saw the service providers as companies, right? Not
Absolutely.
as, and so I think that changes, that then says they're part of the service economy They have a functioning role within the economy. They are not only in service to entrepreneurs who are the drivers, service provision, business service providers, particularly in Africa.
No, I mean, this is so true. So look, why did some of the big four companies like the Andersen Consulting and all those kind of people, why did they go bankrupt when the Enron crisis happened? Because the entire system relies on those service providers to basically truth test whatever entrepreneurs or businesses globally are saying, right? So, I mean, so literally everywhere else in the world where you have a functioning economy, because remember again, our goal is not to look for
Right.
superstars, right? We want to create prosperity in our economies. Everywhere you have a functioning economy, you need to have people who are literally the arbiters that are basically saying, hey, yes, I have seen the numbers of this company. You can trust them. Oh, yes, as a lawyer, the contract that you're writing, the clauses actually match what the constitution of the country you are dealing in is doing. Or, as a company that's trying to put together like a factory, the standards that you have actually make sense. So the point we're trying to make is these service providers are not, by the way, uh, you know, actor that you bring in whenever. Because if they don't have the capacity to actually provide whatever they're providing, the assets that you're trying to build will never thrive.
It's such a cool analogy to think about Enron because it really labels the service provider in that mix as the driver of the economy. Their ability to have, in this case, assurances that work. Like markets work because
Everything.
there's systems of assurances. Systems of assurances are
Exactly.
provided by service businesses, by nobody else. And so if we don't actually think about that, which then takes it into when we think about local capital mobilization, in economies in Africa and other places, we start by thinking about the money, but we should start with thinking about the service providers because local capital mobilization happens because there's an operating system that allows capital to move locally. And so thinking about how that works is a starting place. So taking this idea, the critical importance of the service economy as a driver in the economy, that means it also probably needs investment capital, which is something that I don't hear talked about very much to really say, what would it look like to invest in service businesses? But Charity, we've done some of that. The investment vehicles in the fund have actually invested in service businesses, right?
Absolutely. I think you find investable businesses in a range of sectors, including business development support. And so we have a couple of examples. One that comes to mind, Paid HR, is a company that does HR software and has a particular ability to support companies in our ecosystem. So they are both an investee of one of the funds and a service provider. Like we've used them for other portfolio companies when their need was around this issue of HR software. And so I think there's absolutely a case for investing. We see it at a anecdotal level, just one-offs. It'd be really interesting to see what would it look like to really invest in that sector or have a focus, like you would have funds that invest in certain sectors, what kind of impact that would have, because they then do touch all the other small businesses that they support. But I think in some indirect way, this fund with a dedicated BDS budget and value creation focus allows for some of that, allows for us to catalyze and to create a market for some of these smaller BDSPs.
I think one of the important pieces about the fund was our commitment to domiciliation. I wouldn't have guessed at the beginning of this fund that local capital mobilization would be the core theme. It seemed a long ways away. But it really, all the crap that's happened in the last year has opened up this opportunity to really refocus, which I think revitalizes, right? Like, it's about the CPAs. Like, at some point, we need to have all this infrastructure in place to make those things happen. And when we don't value that, or we see the entrepreneur outside of the operating system in which they're acting, we don't see the capital solutions for that operating system, which are real.
Absolutely. I think
Absolutely.
you've named something there. What could it look like to have a real investment in this sector? Because that's what it is to me. It is a type of business,
Right.
and they actually may be multiple sectors, and if we don't have those in place, you have gaps for your other businesses that need an accountant, that need a lawyer, that need.
Let me even try a metaphor to kind of crystallize this. Like, what would a society look like if there was no investment in education or in healthcare,
Or in
right? So
roads, Eric, right?
I'm
Like, if we
making
didn't build bridges and roads, like, we need infrastructure.
and some of the infrastructure is soft, some of it is hard, but you need it because if you don't have that, then you can't really, at least you can create productivity. And fundamentally, whether it is an enterprise or an individual or a community or a country, what we are looking for is a little bit more productivity.
And as we look at the outputs of that, of the absolute importance of creating jobs, and I think we make this jump from sort of the need to create jobs and dignified work and all these kinds of ideas of what the outcomes are, we go back to the entrepreneur and then we think, oh, what capital does that entrepreneur need? And it's hard. It's not very sexy to say what we really need are really good accountants. But if we don't invest in all of that, if we don't see that kind of infrastructure as sexy and cool, then we just go back and say, well, this all failed because, there's not an infrastructure in place. Well, so build the freaking infrastructure and focus on that, as opposed to.
No, listen, this is the story of somebody who lost the keys in the dark and who come underneath a lamppost to look for the keys there because this is where there is light. It's the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to end something hopeful. Like, what do you see in your futures? What do you see? How is ESP going to kick ass and make all this happen?
Yeah. So I think, I'm mulling over all the really interesting tangents we've had and all the tangents we've had today, but in the past, Joy. And the thing that I'm sitting on the most is hope and hopefulness and leading with hopefulness and not allowing the work that we do to get like dampened with the risk and the return and the some of the things that I think can limit our imagination. And so to me, hopefulness really feels like an invitation to say, can we design this better? Can we flip how we do things? Can we engage differently with our BDSPs? Because there's a hope that we could even make a 10%, a 15% bigger impact, shifts of power, shifts of prosperity, certainly, like that's centered in how we do our work. But it's not super quippy. But for me, the thing that when I'm reflecting, it's how do I center hope more? How can I be like an engineer of hope in all that we're doing?
Yeah. So I think basically building on what Charity is saying, I would probably say hopeful insights or insightful hope. Because I think through the work that we do, we collect a lot of data about what is actually happening to entrepreneurs in Africa, which is very, very different than what people imagine they are going
Right.
through, right? I do believe that at a time when you have large language models, I think there is a way to turn some of that knowledge into insights, which can inform the next generation of service providers, into insights which can inform capital allocators and maybe inform the next kind of financial solutions that get provided for entrepreneurs. for me, that's really where I see us going. But for the simple reason that I think next year we're going to probably support, I don't know, over like 8,000 individual entrepreneurs. Some of them very, very small individuals, others sort of slightly bigger, and a number of institutions that work with them. It generates a lot of data that, if it could be curated and organized and codified, could probably drive innovation in both services and finance. So I want to end with insightful hope or hopeful insights. I don't know which one we use, but something which combines hope and insights. Yeah.
I was going to say, it really points to Eric and I's dynamic. He's like a data insights guy, and I'm like, let's engineer something new. That is essentially who we are at our cores, I think. But would love to hear your thoughts on in the end.
Well, in the end, it's thinking about hope. I think a lot about how do we reframe things and the power in that. Simply rethinking this sort of process of writing this learning book and really centering the service economy and saying that's not ancillary to the activity that's actually happening. It's central. And these kinds of reframes, these shifts that started, Eric, with you putting entrepreneurs at the center, and then having ESP, and how Charity, you and Eric built this together to really have it be entrepreneurs in the context of their operating system, in the context of their market, and leading with that. So let's just keep doing these reframes and we'll change the world.
I love it.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy.
If you believe in the power of our financial systems as a force for good, why not consider donating to Criterion Institute? Your donation enables us to stand in the face of power and ensures the power of our financial systems is directed to be a positive force against systemic injustice. Every dollar goes directly towards enabling investors and social change organizations to intervene in financial systems in bold and imaginative new ways. Find out more about the change we're creating at criterioninstitute.org/donate.
To learn more about our work, visit us at criterioninstitute.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews help our podcast reach a wider audience. Thanks for listening.